Welcome to Growing the Seed, the podcast where we document the steps we take to build the Sowing Seed podcast, the business, and the brand. We'll share what works, and we'll share the challenges. And now, here's your host, Matt Miller.
On a previous episode, I talked about, not being Superman, but just learning how to batch content. One of the strategies that I have used very, very successfully over the last few years is to batch content in conjunction with trade shows. I actually learned that from Joshua Sheets of the Radical Personal Finance podcast. I was at Podcast Movement for the very first time going on 4 years ago in Fort Worth, Texas. And Joshua had a table set up out in the hallway. And when everybody else was in and out of sessions and workshops for the several days the event was going on, Joshua was doing interviews. And since all the top podcasters across the country were there, he was able to interview many of them back to back over the course of several days and produce content for literally months in advance, all in one shot. Well, so when I launched my podcast going on 3 years ago, School Zone, School Fundraising Ideas podcast. It's a show that I do each week. I bring on other school fundraising or resource companies that are in the space that we work in with my national franchise called School Spirit Vending. And it gives me an opportunity to develop relationships with and highlight some absolutely amazing companies that are out there serving schools and providing funds for education and for our kids all across the country. Well, running a national franchise with 110 plus franchisees in 42 states, having our own schools that we work in and out of and have done so now for going on 11 years, heading up a family, etc., active in our church and active as part of the board of directors of Kids Across Cultures, a nonprofit that I work with and have done traveling overseas for. I've had to learn how to get really, really creative with my time. I've had to learn how to maximize my time in order to get it all done. And so 2 years ago, my sister Heidi, who is my communications director and in a lot of ways my assistant, my youngest Rebecca, who was 14 at the time, and I ended up going to the Texas PTA conference, summer conference in July down in San Antonio. And for 2 straight days, we interviewed 32 different school fundraising and resource companies. Well, those 32 interviews ended up being over a year's worth of content at the time, because at that point we were releasing the show every 2 weeks. We've gone to weekly now, and I just sat at our booth and interviewed and recorded and knocked out an entire year's worth of content plus in 2 days. Last year in February, we went to the California PTA in San Jose and did the exact same thing. I think we talked to 18 or 20 companies at that event. So guys, as you are learning to produce content, as you are doing what you do, if there's a way to maximize and to utilize trade shows to your benefit like we have, I would highly encourage you to do so as well. It has been a complete game changer for me. People scratch their head and wonder how it is that I've got 2 private podcasts a week I do for our franchise team. I have the School Zone podcast I just mentioned. I've got the Some Guys in the Bible podcast that I do with Scott Hooper and a group of guys as we do a Bible study each week locally. And of course, I've got Sowing Seed that is a 3 to 4 time a week show. How do I do it? I've learned how to batch content. I don't know how many of you guys listen to Entrepreneur on Fire, John Lee Dumas's show. For years, he has produced episodes 7 days a week, and it's an interview-based show. So he's interviewing people and releasing those interviews 7 days a week. Well, how does he do it? Last I heard, I think he's changed his format a bit, or is going to be soon, but he was doing 8 interviews every Monday. So the rest of his week, he could do whatever he wanted. So he had content for an entire week plus a spare that he did each and every week. In the process, his show doesn't own him, he owns it. Batching content, utilizing trade shows to do so if and where it makes sense. Highly recommend it. God bless you.
Thanks for listening. Check out our website, sowingseed.net, the Sowing Seed channel on YouTube, and if you got something out of today's podcast, give us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. Until next time, go plant the seed you need to succeed.